great to meet someone where, after going through all my credentials, if you will, as soon as I mentioned Mo, Larry, and Curly, they said I was close. It was really amazing. I really appreciate Jane having me here for this, but I really think we need to tell our little secret. I don't think very many people know about this, but back in June, it was kind of a surprise to both of us, but Jane and I were very quickly married at DF10. And actually, Ray Levin is the person responsible for that. Jane and I are both on his board of advisors for Eagle Lux Transportation. And my family lives here in Boca Raton. In fact, it's a rare privilege and a pleasure for me to have my parents and my sister Lauren here. I was down visiting them in June, and I told Ray I was coming down and love to meet with you and the rest of your board. And so Jane happened to come along to that lunch. Turned out that the waiter was a very good friend of Ray's. I think they hadn't seen him in a while. And Ray, in his excitement, introduced, what was your friend's name? I forgot, but he said, I'd like to meet Jane and Jeff Kruger. And that's the way he said it. So we were instantly married. And Jane and I just looked at each other and said, yeah, that's our son, Ray. So thank you all for joining me for this. I appreciate it. I'm going to ask you to take whatever your preconceived notions are about how this country does space exploration. You know, we've grown up for 50 years thinking of NASA and the space shuttle and the Apollo program and the vehicles NASA's trying to build to replace the space shuttle. What you're going to hear has nothing to do with that. So I want you to take those concepts, take those ideas out of your head, put them in a little box, kick them under the table. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about what is called the new space industry by the people within the space community. NASA is often within this community talked about as legacy space or traditional space, even sometimes old space. But new space is about emerging entrepreneurial space industry. The bulk of that is occurring in this country, but it is not exclusive to this country. I've done enough traveling overseas and met with entrepreneurs who are doing this kind of thing in Mexico, in Europe, in South America. This is the new economic frontier. Space will no longer be the domain, whether it's national space programs or new space entrepreneurs. Will no longer be just a domain of countries like the United States and Russia and China and so forth. It helps to think about this industry as any other industry by breaking it down into sectors. This industry, on the one hand, is very new. On the other hand, it's about 20 years old. When Christos talked this morning, his very last point, never give up, never surrender, there's always another move. That is so well exemplified by the entrepreneurs that make up the new space industry. Some of these people have been trying for 20 years. They have built companies, watched those companies fail or be crushed by the Boeings and the Lockheed Martins and the others that perceived them as a threat, and they never gave up. They came back, they created a new company. So the 6 industry sectors, first off, what you see here is some of the companies that make up those sectors. This is not a formally established definition of these sectors. This is based on my effort of really starting to parse this out to help explain what makes up this industry. So you can see the different things up there and examples of some of the companies. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each one of these. Now, there's something missing up here. What do you need? What do you need if you want to get into space that's not up here? If you have a thought they want to throw out.
Colonization.
Well, you got to get there to have the colonization. But what do you need before you get there? You need spaceports. I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar, to some extent at least, with Cape Canaveral. But I'll bet none of you realize that Wisconsin wants to build a commercial spaceport. Or Oklahoma. Maybe you've heard of Spaceport America in New Mexico. I'll talk to you more about this as well, if that's the case. So what I want to do is start out by going through a little bit more detail about these companies in this industry. You might be asking, why is atmospheric flight. Flight that's within the atmosphere, not in space. Why would that be considered part of the new space industry? One of the main reasons is the work that these companies are doing, especially the first one, the Rocket Racing League, they help provide visibility for this emerging industry. It gets a lot of media attention. And you can see from here that they are just on the cusp of getting ready to start doing rocket racing in the sky, virtual pylons, if you will. Think of NASCAR in the air. The other reason that atmospheric flight is connected to new space is the companies that make the rocket engines that will propel these rocket racers are new space companies. One of which I'll mention here, X-Core Aerospace. Another one is called Armadillo Aerospace. So Rocket Racing League vehicles provide a test bed, if you will. They also provide non-space related revenue for these new space companies and give them an opportunity to bring money in as they work toward their long-term goal, and also give them an opportunity to continue to develop their technologies, their capabilities, and the products that they're manufacturing and selling. Zero G, or Zero Gravity Corporation. Anybody here heard of that company?
Yeah.
Do you know where they fly out of, primarily?
Here.
Fort Lauderdale Airport. And you can see that they've been around since 1993. That's a picture of a modified 747 that they fly. They essentially fly these parabolic flights like this. So you get 30 seconds or so weightlessness, you zoom back down, then you see how well you handle a sudden increase in weight before they take you right back up and so forth. So it's not only tremendous fun, and I do want to emphasize that. You know, there is no reason that we all can't have fun with our entrepreneurial passions, in addition to accomplishing all the goals that we set for ourselves. But there's also business applications. Just in September, 5 small companies, entrepreneurial companies, flew small payloads to test new products that they're manufacturing, subsystems and components that they want to sell to larger space firms, but they needed a low-cost way to do some very quick, repeated testing in a microgravity or zero-gravity environment. So switching from atmospheric flight, let's go up a little higher in altitude. In fact, I ask you to think of this. Obviously, part of what I want to do here is really transform your thinking about how we do space, if you will. And what I'm doing here is taking you up step by step to a higher and higher altitude. We're essentially within the new space industry right now. What we're doing for the next couple of years is extending aviation to a higher and higher altitude. When you ask yourself, at what point does that distinction between aviation and space transportation, where does that occur? This industry is going to blur that distinction. So, suborbital transportation. I presume that some of you have heard of Virgin Galactic, probably the most media savvy of these companies, a UK-based company, but will be conducting their first flights on Spaceport America in New Mexico. Their first revenue-generating flights to fly passengers up to about 100 kilometers. And at that altitude, they will experience 5 or 6 minutes of weightlessness. They'll see the blackness of space and the stars above them, the curvature of the earth below them, before they glide back to Earth. And you can see that there's real money being spent on making this happen. You can also see the last bullet there on the Virgin Galactic, suborbital point-to-point passenger flights. Now, the technology challenges to make that happen are pretty great. But Richard Branson, everybody knows him in his association with Virgin, this is one of his companies, has made it quite clear this is not his end goal. He's already looking at how can I do what the Concorde SST did, but in a much shorter time frame, suborbital point-to-point. X-Core Aerospace, taking an entirely different approach, entirely different kind of vehicle, 1 passenger versus 6 passengers, shorter altitude, lower cost. They got their first institutional investment just a few months ago. So real progress is being made in this industry as they also are obtaining institutional investment versus just from individual investors. Stepping up to a higher altitude again. Getting beyond that suborbital barrier of 62.5 miles or so, 100 kilometers, up to where the shuttle flies, up to where the space station is, a couple hundred miles up. Orbital transportation companies. This is just one of several, and I forgot to make that point. What you're seeing here is not all of the companies, but a representation of the more well-established companies in each of these industry sectors. So you can see some of the accomplishments, some of the recent accomplishments of space exploration technologies, or SpaceX Corporation as it's called. And again, recent investment that they've received. They're also looking at building a capsule to carry astronauts to the station, commercial passengers to the station. But Elon Musk, founder of PayPal, and actually started this company, has made it very clear. His goal is to provide low-cost transportation throughout the entire solar system. Now that's long-term thinking. That's what he wants to do. He's received seed funding from NASA as part of NASA's Commercial Orbital Transportation Services program, where they want to start relying on entrepreneurial companies to carry crew and cargo up and back from the space station. Well, what's transportation without a destination? Ultimately, that's what tourism is really all about, going somewhere. Bigelow Aerospace, founded by Ronald Bigelow, president of Spaceport America, made his fortune in the hotel business. This company already has 2 of these modules, scale-sized modules, in orbit. The second item from the left is an actual picture from a camera on the outside and that looking down at Earth. On the right is what he calls a Nautilus lunar cruiser. You put these modules together, you can be as big as you want, they can float in orbit, be a building, it can be a hotel or anything else. You put rockets on the back, they can cruise through space. What he's ultimately looking at is there are 5 points called the range points, L1 through 5, between the Earth and the Moon and the Sun, where the gravitational pull is exactly the same. You park something there, it stays there. You don't need rockets to keep firing to keep it stationary. He's looking at putting these habitats there, having them assembled, lowered down, ready to go to the planet, to the surface of the Moon. NASA's very interested in this. The point that I want to make is, look at some of the things I said that this could be used for. I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I go around and talk to students at University of North Carolina, at NC State, at Duke University, and I tell them, imagine that your 3 universities, sometime in the middle of the next decade, sorry, you'll graduate already, but your 3 universities buy a big old module and own the world's first orbiting campus, where students can go for several days at a time. That is entirely possible by the middle of next decade, without NASA having anything to do with this. This is entirely private sector activity. Service and support companies. Orbital Outfitters, formed about 2 years ago. Well, if Export Aerospace and Virgin Galactic are going to fly you into space, you're not going to be sitting there in a t-shirt and shorts as if you're in the Bahamas. You got to have something to protect you in case there's a rapid decompression in that aircraft, spacecraft that you're sitting in. That's the purpose of this spacesuit that this company is building. It's the first one doing this, designed for these commercial passengers. Function over fashion for now. What happens when competition heats up? How do you start differentiating your products? Remember what the first cell phones looked like and the first PCs looked like compared to now. When you run out of functional enhancements, then you start playing around with color and shape and size and things like that. Same thing will happen here. The company on the bottom, Space Adventures. This is the company that brokers the flights of those 5 or 6 people now who paid $20 or $30 million to go to the space station. They also handle zero gravity flights, suborbital flights. You may not know that they announced earlier this year a circumlunar mission for a mere $100 million. You can fly with 2 Russian astronauts on the Soyuz capsule around the moon and back. Now think about that. What it cost to do that in the 60s with Apollo can be done for $100 million today. And the company Space Adventures is already talking with 3 people about doing this. There are people who can afford to do these things. So it will be expensive at first, as is anything that's new. And then eventually competition sets in. I mentioned the spaceports, and you've seen the companies I've talked about. This is where these companies and a few others that I did refer to, where they are conducting or planning on conducting their business. These are not all operational spaceports. They're in various degrees of existence. Mojave is the first commercial spaceport as far as licensed by the FAA. Oklahoma Spaceport currently exists. You know about Cape Canaveral. Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, that's Wallops Island. That's the facility shared with NASA. Sheboygan. Why Sheboygan, Wisconsin, of all places? Right on the lake. Huge amount of protected airspace, protected in terms of no commercial aircraft can fly through it. So there's no concern about collisions doing rocket launches out over the lake. And hobbyists have been launching rockets there for several decades, right out over the lake. But they understand the challenge that they face to raise the money to convince people to buy bonds to pay for commercial spaceports. So the leaders in Sheboygan are starting out by building an education center, the Great Lakes Aerospace Science and Education Center. That's the first part of their plan to build a commercial spaceport. But I'm saving Spaceport America for last. In September 2006, I took that picture along the highway. Future sight up. On the right, as of August 2008, the design was completed. That's an idea of what the interior is intended to look like. And you see the exterior designed to blend in with the desert surroundings. The executive director of this spaceport understands that even though Virgin Galactic will be flying there first, and eventually maybe Export Aerospace and other companies, that's not going to provide enough revenue for a good number of years to make that space center profitable. So he understands he's got the potential to create an educational center, an aerospace park, an entertainment center. People that go there to fly, their families are going to go with them. And he wants to have something like a Disney type of experience there. So that, again, to go back to my comment about the Rocket Racing League, sports, entertainment, education, all of these are potential markets that will be served by and energized by the new space industry. They have already done a couple of small-scale vertical launches. Right now, Spaceport America, besides the design, is nothing more than a concrete apron with one vertical launch rail. But as we all know as entrepreneurs, you start small, you take evolutionary steps, you learn as you go, and that's what they're doing. So what's the timeline, the new space timeline? What's a reasonable expectation for when Virgin Galactic will be flying, Export Aerospace, Falcon 1 and Falcon 9 and SpaceX Corporation, Bigelow Aerospace again, lunar habitats, and of course the years up on top. This is not that far away. And the next time you hear about NASA's time frame, it's not that different from this. I like to tell people I think it's an even bet that the next American on the moon could be a NASA employee or an entrepreneurial employee or the employee of a large corporation or a wealthy individual. That's assuming that we all don't get beat by the Chinese or I don't know how Russia could do it quite yet. But main point here is this is realistic. It is not that far away. Now with this as a, pardon the pun, a launching point, let's take our perspective even further out in the future. This is one of my absolute favorite images, and I'm going to stand over here and get out of the way. This was created by Patrick Collins. He calls it Space Term Business by the year 2030. And I think most of you could probably read the text up there. One point to take from this, from the graphic representation, forget about the words for a minute, is look at the connection between the Earth and the Moon. This is about extending the global economy to the Moon and ultimately beyond. This is not just about space exploration as we've known it, it's about economic activity, taking all human activity out into space. And look at what you see here. Now this is of course what he's projecting. Some of this may take longer, some of this may not happen at all, some of it may happen more quickly than anything. Orbiting hotels, daily scheduled lunar flights, propellant stations, gas stations in space. A lot more effective than having to launch with all the propellant you need. A lot easier to design spacecraft that once they're in space, they never come back to Earth or they never land on the moon. They just go back and forth between the two. Because that's all they're designed to do. Efficient engineering design. Well, if you're going to do that, you need things like gas stations and depots. why shouldn't that all be owned and operated by companies that are providing a service to whoever wants to buy it, whether that's NASA, or the European Space Agency, or the Japanese Space Agency, or the Brazilian Space Agency? If you think this won't happen, now think about this. This is Orville Wright. He was right in the middle. I mean, he wasn't the middle, he was at the beginning. He was the one that made aviation happen. And yet, he did not have enough clairvoyance to really see what might be possible, because he was trapped within his own knowledge, within his own experience. That's one of the biggest challenges we all face, whether we're entrepreneurs or not. You really want to think outside the box? I think it was Sun Tzu who said, to gain knowledge, add something every day. To gain wisdom, get rid of something every day. It's not only our egos that get in our way, it's what we know and what we are so damn certain about that we can't do. If you're an entrepreneur, you'll find plenty of people, just like all the ones in this business, who will tell you it can't be done. And then you'll find somebody in the back of the room going, oh yeah, it can be done. Who are you going to listen to? There's far too many people telling us it can't be done. Everybody that is working on this space, like every entrepreneur in this room, operates on the exact opposite principle. Damn straight, it can be done, it will be done. If I can't do it, I'll pave the way, someone will come behind me, stand on my shoulders, I'll take the arrows in the back. I'm the pioneer, but eventually, there'll be hundreds of people and then thousands of people living, working, playing, learning in space. Despite the Orville Wrights of the world, who cannot get out of their own box of knowledge and experience. Going back to what Chris was talking about this morning, that's why it's these small companies and these entrepreneurs that create the breakthroughs. It's not the established firms that want to protect their install base, protect their customer base. That's not usually where the new ideas come from. So some closing questions that I ask you to read. Think about these. Stay awake all night. But this is what I hope to give you some information to think about, especially if you're an entrepreneur, but also if you're an investor. This is an emerging industry. It faces challenges, it faces struggles, no different from all the other emerging industries that are represented by all of you in this room. I want to close with this. It's the homepage of my website. For those of you who are interested in that old book that Jane held up and it was on the cover, for those of you who think horizontally, you can purchase it from our website at the top. For those of you who work vertically, you can click on the left and purchase it. And you'll also find other information up there about this industry. And certainly, I would love a chance to talk with each and every one of you, but I know the laws of physics probably prevents that from happening. You can certainly contact me through this as well, my phone number, email address, and so forth. So that's the end of my presentation. I very much appreciate your attention, and we love to answer your questions.
So who owns the air rights? Who's managing the air rights of this galactic frontier?
Depends on what country you're talking about, and I'm more familiar with the United States, so permit me to address that. I mentioned the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. Within that office, within that administration, I should say, is the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And that is the part of the FAA that is responsible for regulating these vehicles and these companies, and also ensuring the safety of what's referred to so wonderfully as the uninvolved third party on the ground. So there's the regulatory issues and indemnification issues in case there's an accident and that kind of thing. And that's the lead agency responsible for managing this. In fact, that's one of the reasons that Virgin Galactic decided to initiate its flight to the United States, because the regulatory regime here is well understood. It's been prepared.
But what's to prevent Russia and the U.S. wanting to go and put a capsule in the same place?
So you're talking, all right, so further out, dealing with the moon, for example, There's a lot of ambiguity in the existing treaties. The original UN Space Treaty of 1967, I think it was, or 68, of which the United States is a signatory. Then there was the Moon Treaty sometime in the 70s that the United States did not sign, never ratified in the Senate, so we're not beholden to it. So the one that would rely or apply to us would be the original Space Treaty. It refers to what governments can and cannot do. And so it's pretty well laid out there that, for example, neither Russia nor the United States or any national space program can land a vehicle on the moon and say, I own this real estate. It's just illegal. International treaty. But there's nothing in there about what a company can do. Because in 1967, when they were talking about the treaty, no one was really imagining. And that's where the attorneys will get involved. Because it will happen. I have some friends who are space attorneys. They are constantly dealing with this question. And the answer will come when someone does something that forces the issue. What court handles it? The time will come. All the answers are there. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer this, but the new race to the moon ostensibly is about something called Helium III, which is a super energy source. Is that real, or what do you know about that? Is that what's fueling everybody's interest in going there?
By the way, whenever I know the answer, I always say 42. Does anybody know where that comes from?
Yep.
Yes, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The answer to everything is 42. But in this case, I guess it could be more than one answer to something. Yes, Helium III is an isotope, and don't ask me to explain what that is, because that exceeds my knowledge. It's an element that exists in the soil, the regolith of the moon. And it's there because eons of bombardment of the moon's surface by the solar radiation emanating from the sun has created this isotope. So there's tremendous interest and discussion about going to the moon and mining Helium-3. Why? Because Helium-3 would be an ideal fuel source for fusion reactors. Now, a couple of doses of reality. It'll never happen as long as it costs as much to go into space as it does now. Hence the need for private sector transportation in space, just like we have on Earth. Number one. Number two, you're not going to just take a big shovel, scoop up a couple of pounds, put it in the bucket, and have a couple of pounds of Helium-3. It's a lot harder than that. But the science is there to extract it from the soil. Will it happen? Yes, because I believe everything eventually will happen. It won't be next year, next decade. But yes, that's a very real potential source of future fuel. Another thing, by the way, in the surface or elements within the soil on the moon are the platinum metal groups. And platinum is very important for catalytic converters, for example, in our cars. From what I've read about, if we're going to do things with a hydrogen economy, platinum is going to become a very important commodity. Platinum is very expensive. But again, until it's very cheap to get from there to here, it doesn't matter. And think that won't happen? Here's a story a friend of mine loves to tell. You go back to Alabama 125 years from now, and you tell a cotton farmer, you know that cotton that you're growing, it's going to be picked, it's going to be put on a ship, it's going to be sent across the Pacific to Hong Kong, manufactured into a shirt, shipped back here, and you'll be able to go down to the Gap and buy that shirt for $25. And of course, he's going to look at you like you're absolutely insane. It's all about transportation. And eventually, yes, we will be able to do that. It's real. But it's not easy. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you for your presentation. Recently, I read somewhere that the U.S. military, I'm not sure which branch, but they're planning to have small vehicles that can transport a dozen troops very quickly through space. Through space to various points along the way. So, things about that. Number one. Secondly, we'd like to see sort of, government and then private sector combinations here, or joint efforts, joint funding.
Okay, to the first question, I imagine what you're referring to is what the Marines have been talking about doing since about 2002. A lot of times the first place you see these things is Popular Mechanics magazine, which I remember reading when I was a kid. And they do a fairly good job of getting the facts right. And then about a week or two ago, a couple more stories popped up. There are study groups within the Marines and probably elsewhere in the military that are looking at the feasibility, what technology is required, when can we realistically do this. So yes, you can imagine that the military would love to be able to insert a squad or a platoon of Marines or special forces anywhere in the world in a matter of hours. But I don't think I am so brilliant that I figured this out. I'm sure a lot of others did. When I started reading about this, to me there's a real big flaw in the current thinking, which is extraction. Once this vehicle lands and discharges its 12 Marines and they're there to rescue hostages, there was nothing in there about how do they get out. This vehicle is not going to just be able to take off and go back into space. So the article basically said they have to wait there until they're extracted by more conventional forces. And of course, everyone else is going to just sit there and let them wait. So I was very baffled by that. But yes, there is a tremendous interest on the part of the Air Force as well in these new space companies to be able to launch small satellites into orbit repeatedly and very quickly, almost at a moment's notice, which we can't do right now with our traditional commercial launch capabilities. So that's another interest that the military has. Your second question, will there be partnerships between government and private sector? We're seeing more of that. There needs to be more. NASA has, I think, very belatedly in the last few years begun to understand how much they need the private sector in the new space industry. The COTS program I referred to was one of their first efforts at providing that kind of incentive, but that's still not the kind of partnership that many would like to see. Many envision a much clearer distinction between NASA needs to get out of the transportation business. It's proven with the space shuttle, it failed to accomplish its goals. The shuttle never flew 55 times a year. The shuttle never brought the cost of a pound of payload to orbit down to $1,000. It's still at about $10,000 a pound. So we all have to lose weight if you want to go right now. It never accomplished its goals. Why? Because the government is not set up to lower the cost of a product or service. That's what you all do. So many people would like to see NASA just do R&D or help build the vehicles that no company can afford to do or has any commercial interest in doing. Leave the near frontier between the Earth and the Moon to the private sector. Even if it takes a bit longer, it's the private sector that will build an economically viable space transportation system. The government will never do it, neither ours nor anybody else's, because they don't know how. And let NASA do what it also does very well: unmanned exploration of distant planets. No company's going to do that right now, unless one of you figure out how to make some money doing that. Maybe you will, maybe I'll change it. So yes, there needs to be that, and I think there will be more of it. You notice I don't answer questions quickly. I just have too much fun. Well, thank you.
I know people who stay on the space station a long time. It's my understanding that long-term effects of radiation and witness still are something of a barrier to space.
The radiation is a big concern when you start talking about trips to Mars. Can you imagine being in a spacecraft for 6 months or longer each way? Right? There's a big concern with radiation. And the lack of gravity. We have experience, as you said, with people being on the space station and they exercise and so forth. They're still very weak when they come back to Earth. And that's one of the arguments for having the space station begin to focus more on that kind of research as we prepare for these long distance voyages, because it is a concern. And I'll throw in another one that very few people are talking about and is a little further in the future. But the day will come when the first human being is born on the moon. Will that person survive if they come back to Earth? Will their bodies that were formed during that 9-month gestation period in 1/6 gravity of Earth, what happens